Hello everyone. Today we finally find out what the Tyrannosaurus rex and its kind really look like, how they hunted, and in general, will blow our minds as usual, Tyrannosaurus rex. What's wrong with dinosaurs in the last trilogy? And also the following provocation attracted hordes of pseudoscientific hominids and shockwaves of their righteous anger. From physiological rejections directed at me. How could this Tyrannosaurus not bite? How was this Tyrannosaurus not a predator? And it bore its fruits. Let them not hear my arguments, it's their problem. But as a result, I got a scathing list of arguments that scientists use. And now we will go through all the key arguments, decide for or against their main arguments, the stages of pneumatization of bones. Study physics, couldn't bite, ha ha ha. Few could hear the main idea of the Tyrannosaurus video. It couldn't bite, as scientists assert. And based on the model built by scientists, namely an 8-ton jaw moving at a speed of no more than 28 kilometers per hour, with huge teeth, without claws, and also without front paws, could not be a predator, at least to scavengers or small and insect eaters. In fact, I even asserted above that, given his proportions and sizes, Tyrannosaurus and similar ones could not exist in nature. They could not have lived for a week in our world. But about everything in order. First, I'll explain why I even started to doubt. The thing is, nature is brilliant. It doesn't do anything just for the sake of it, and if it does, its creation always perfectly fits the environment and conditions in which it lives. Let's start from this. The habitat, lifestyle, and even the type of occupation of any creation, not just a living one, dictate its form. Take, for example, flight. Here's a hawk, a bat, an airplane, Batman, and a flying fish. In the first case, it's a bird. In the second case, it's a mammal. In the third case, it's a technical device. In the fourth case, it's a fictional millionaire. In the fifth case, it's a fish. But whoever they were, the environment, flight dictates the form. And that means there will definitely be wings in one form or another and a lightweight body. These two conditions are inevitable. Or here's another example. Ichthyosaur, shark, dolphin, submarine. The same thing. In the first case, it's a reptile. In the second, a fish. In the third, a mammal. In the fourth, a technical device. And yet again, the environment dictates the form. But now the main thing is the aerodynamic, or rather aquadynamic body shape and small fins, floats. There are other similarities, but they are not so obvious. This list can go on indefinitely. You never confuse a machine with a car, because any car, no matter who made it, will have characteristic features necessary to perform the task at hand. Just like any machine in the world, it will externally resemble any other. It will have the same parts and aggregates and a very similar form, which is dictated by the task. You will never confuse a lawnmower with a harvester. And what about tyrannosaurs? Is there anything similar in nature now? Of course, there are kangaroos, for example, or chickens, penguins, cassowaries, ostriches, geese. Again, humans are also bipedal, but none of them are predators. Because in today's conditions, hunting other animals standing or running on two legs is impossible. Well, of course, a man can hunt, but he has two hands in which he can hold a bow, spear, or automatic. But try to take away a man's hands and he too will become absolutely defenseless. And since there are no tyrannosaurs now, it means that the environment is not suitable in the first place. Nevertheless, for 240 million years, nature not only did not allow them to die out, but considered this species to be dominant. Eras changed eras, hundreds of millions of years passed, and nature never figured out how to get rid of such an inconvenient specimen. Or maybe scientists don't want to look beyond their own nose. I tried to convey this simple thought in the last video, What's Wrong with Dinosaurs, Part 1. But it turned out that far from everyone can listen and hear. But this is all lyrics, and for purposeful people from science, one philosophy is not enough for them. Calculations and diagrams give. But so now, will it be? Argument of officials number 1 Richagi. Let's proceed to the calculations. Let's take the visualization scheme from Scott Hartman as a basis and start calculating. Let's find the center of gravity of this creature. It's quite obvious that it would have to come down on its haunches, where the dinosaur's legs grow from. And to start with, let's measure the proportions. The front part will be about 4.5 meters, and the back part, including the tail, will be about 6 meters. This means that the ratio of the sides of this dinosaur to each other is 3 to 4. From here on, it doesn't matter whether the front part is 2 meters or not. We've learned the main proportion. Now we open the physics textbook for the 7th grade. Look at a bunch of formulas and understand that it's easier and clearer to demonstrate the calculations on a special website of designers. From the data obtained from the enemy's headquarters, we know that the average weight of a Tyrannosaurus is about 8 tons. We subtract a ton from them, half a ton of weight on each leg. In principle, it doesn't really matter. You can even subtract 20 kilograms, but the calculations will simply look clearer this way. We will have 7 tons of free mass left. It's clear that the main weight goes to the body, the hull, the head, and the tail. So, for balance, let's distribute the weight like this. 5 tons to the front part and 2 tons to the tail. We input these parameters into the calculator. First, we need to calculate the moment of force. We record the parameters of mass, shoulder, force, lever, and get the result. Then, knowing this result and the weight of the tail, we get the necessary length of more than 36 feet. And we only have 6. If the fact contradicts the theory, then you discard the theory, right? Then let's find out at what ratio such a tail's mass is. Enough. It turns out at a ratio of 4 tons to the front part and 3 tons to the tail. Seriously. Now let's calculate how much the tail of a Tyrannosaurus actually weighed. It's not as complicated as it might seem, especially since we will be calculating with large margins in favor of official science. So, a tail 6 meters long, it has the shape of a cone with a base of 1 meter and a top of 1 centimeter. We draw. Now for clarity and simplicity of understanding, we add another such cone, but with the opposite orientation. To get the area, it turned out that 2 tails occupy 6 square meters, and 1 accordingly. Now let's calculate the tail profile. The height will be 1 meter, the base thickness 0.5 meter, everything else is the same. It turned out to be 1/4 of a square meter. Well, let's give paleontologists a huge margin and let it be 1/3 of a square meter. Then we divide the known area of 3 square meters into 3/3 of a square meter and get 1 cubic meter. That is, the tail was 1 cubic meter in volume. Well, let's give another huge margin. Let the tail be 1 whole and 5/10 of a cubic meter. Why did we just do that? Because we know perfectly well how much bones weigh and how much meat or fat weighs. The heaviest part of the body is the dense, non-pneumatized bones. They weigh 1 1/10 tons per cubic meter. Meat is 10% lighter. So 1.5 cubic meters of tail, we multiply by 1 1/10 tons. We give the scientists a break and get the maximum tail weight of 1 ton 650 kilograms. And now we plug these values into the design program and get the necessary tail length of 14.5 meters. So where did the scientists get that the tail weighed 3 tons? It turns out in the year 2010, A student named Scott Persons hypothesized that the tail weighed just under 45% of the total muscle mass. Typical, a student, and they present this to us as science. This student apparently was not aware that in order to weigh 3 tons at such a length, the tail would have to be made of, for example, 300 grade concrete, but certainly not muscle. Argument number 2, pneumatization of the bones. Pneumatization. How sweet this word sounds to the ear of a young hominid. How this word harmonizes against the background of a hormonal surge in the blood with such words as automation, mechanization, robotization. The young ears of unprepared scholars literally fall into ecstasy from this word and use it as an argument for and without reason. Pneumatization. So let's deal with this killer argument and weigh the pros and cons. What is pneumatization? Maybe something like a hydraulic drive. I'm sure young, unripe minds think exactly like that. However, these are just cavities in the bones. In some bones, nature forms cavities filled with air. This phenomenon is very strongly developed in birds, some reptiles, and in fact in many species. Even in humans, there are pneumatized parts in the skull. For example, the ethmoid bones. How do scientists argue such behavior of nature? But in the case of birds, everything is obvious. They simply need it to lighten their weight and flight. But why does the terrestrial tyrannosaur need it? Here's how paleontologists answer. Pneumatized bones allowed the tyrannosaur to lighten the weight of the bones themselves and achieve much larger sizes due to this lightening. If until now I had vague suspicions that paleontologists and historians live in some invented Marvel universe, now this suspicion has grown into a firm conviction. There is such a thing in the world, it's called a sopromat resistance of materials. Roughly speaking, a very necessary thing. I recommend everyone who cares to leave the couches and take a look at the real world. The thing is that bones in a living creature play the role of a supporting structure. The muscle carcass is attached to them. That is, they must withstand loads, not just be a place to attach pieces of meat. If the bone is filled with air and has cavities, then its strength decreases significantly. In such a case, tyrannosaurs would simply break their legs trying to stand up. Even the contraction of their own muscles could break their own bones. If you put even more weight on such bones, the animal would turn into a pile of broken bones. Bones. For those who find it hard to believe, I will give an example from construction. Probably many of you know that modern buildings are built according to the principle of monolithic frame. No voids are allowed there, and the columns are additionally reinforced with as strong a reinforcement as possible. However, there is one detail in construction that is almost hollow. It's a hollow overlap plate. Many have seen it. Many floors and ceilings are made of such plates, and at first glance they are very strong. However, this feeling is deceptive. The reinforcement of such a plate is designed for loads only in one direction. Just turn it upside down, put it wrong, and you get something like this. In other words, there is no benefit from pneumatization on dry land, only harm. Why then has nature been perfecting this mechanism for 40 million years in a row? There is only one plausible explanation: for weight relief and fast running. Example perhaps is the ostrich. Their everything is just like a Tyrannosaurus. Pneumatization of bones and fast running up to 80 kilometers per hour. That's faster than a galloping horse. And the most fun argument of paleontologists sounds something like this. He couldn't bite. Ha 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 ha. If there are teeth, then bites. I've already discussed this issue in the video, What's Wrong with Dinosaurs? Therefore, I will only discuss those arguments that were not covered there or were covered insufficiently. So as I've said before, Just biting it is not as simple a task as it might seem at first glance. To bite, first and foremost, you need to match speeds with the prey. Predators have front paws for this, with which the predator clings to the prey, equalizes speeds, and sinks its claws. This moment is fleeting, but the order is exactly like that. Many cite crocodiles, monitors, and other reptiles as examples. Jacob's crocodile catches like a tyrannosaur, but first of all, the crocodile has front paws. With him, the technology is different. He sneaks up on the victim under the water and suddenly grabs it from under the water. The long jaw allows you to grab as deep a part of the victim as possible and clamp the capstan, but the first movement to tear in its own flesh is made by the victim itself. The crocodile just braces with its front paws. The monitor lizard cuts the dry land and follows the victim until it is immobilized. In any case, before death, the victim must either become immobilized or match speeds with the attacker. And in all cases, the attacker has functional front paws. But the Tyrannosaurus is not like that. His front paws are completely useless, in a word, but the teeth are huge. In addition, we just found out that if you trust your own eyes, not the cosplayers from science, then the Tyrannosaurus was ambitious. But how to bite during an ambitious attack? Let's say the Tyrannosaurus has caught up with the prey. It won't stand by peacefully watching itself being devoured. It will try to survive, to wriggle out. And the teeth, though huge, are importantly directed inward the skull. This means that the teeth were already clenched at the moment when the prey was in the mouth, and not just at that moment, but with a reverse jerk. Otherwise, the load would have come on the side part of the teeth at the same time, breaking them. That's why in the first video I concluded that the Tyrannosaur was a scavenger. After all, to make such a bite, the prey must lie motionless, and the predator must be on top of it, pushing off with its only hind legs, making a reverse bite with simultaneous tearing of the flesh. Remember the crocodile? He has a similar situation, but the tearing motion is made by the prey itself so he can attack from below. Just crush the shell and wait for the prey to tear itself apart while trying to escape. But the teeth curved inward only speak of one style of attack from above, pressing the prey to the ground and making the tear independently. In general, a lot of questions have accumulated. In the last video, I concluded that the Tyrannosaur was a scavenger, and indeed it would have been so if everything was exactly as the officials show. Now let's try to create a working model of a Tyrannosaur based on the new data that we have just clarified. First, we remove the excess meat from the legs as it's not needed. This hump here, it only gets in the way, creates extra weight, and interferes with standing on the hind legs, leaning on the tail. We also reduce the layers of skin on the skeleton. All this excess fat is useless. Nature doesn't make bones pneumatic for nothing. Neck, why such a thick neck? Who needs it? Only excess weight creates, we remove. But how will we eat large pieces of meat? And that's how. Now, when we have significantly lightened the weight, the Tyrannosaurus no longer looks so intimidating. Now he can run. And since we've taken the ostrich as a model, let's assume that its speed was comparable to 70-80 km per hour. There's another strange problem. It's the cervical vertebrae. After all, if a tyrannosaur needed to maintain balance, then its neck and tail simply had to have the ability to stretch out into a straight line. Because purely mechanically, this is the strongest and least energy-consuming position. And all the vertebrae of the tyrannosaur look quite logical, except for the cervical ones. Why this strange hump on the neck? What role it played, always looking down. But then, what we're talking about, he could only be a paddle. However, look more closely. I don't want to judge anyone, but agree. There is a strong feeling against the background of the integrity of the other bones that the vertebrae are missing, and those that are as if pulled out of different places, and the two upper vertebrae as if deliberately underline the bend. But this is the skeleton of the Tyrannosaurus. And what about others in this place? Here's another skeleton, 9,380. It doesn't have any vertebrae at all, but the skeleton in this place has vertebrae of a completely different shape. And Stan's skeleton has completely different vertebrae, and so does Jane's skeleton. So what does it mean? Are we being fooled? It feels like this hump was specifically made to compress the neck. Let's straighten it out and see what happens. Unfortunately, only mammals have exactly 7 cervical vertebrae. Reptiles and birds can have as many as they want. There can even be 28 cervical vertebrae. The record holders in this are swans and ostriches. In general, I am more than sure about 2 things. Firstly, the neck simply had to have the ability to fully extend forward, and there could be no hump there. And secondly, there were more than a minimum of 14 vertebrae, not 9. Such a neck, in addition to sharp acceleration, could be an additional compensator of inertia and balance, exactly as in ostriches and swans. This is controversial. At the very least, I would have done the same in nature. However, the problem of maneuvering is nowhere else. He still can't make sharp maneuvers, which is unacceptable for a predator. How to maneuver and fight inertia, and how do modern animals deal with it? The same ostriches, for example? Yes, why look far? Go out into the street, run, and try to make a sharp turn. Regardless of whether you then make a successful or not so successful swing, you will instinctively throw your hand to the side at the moment of the turn. This is not a mistake. It's a natural reflex that allows you to compensate for inertia. The wings of an ostrich are needed for the same exact reason. So, the front paws of a tyrannosaur are not a useless vestige after all. So why are they drawn forward? Let's take another look at the skeleton of a cassowary or an ostrich and see how the paws of a tyrannosaur should actually be attached. In other words, the tyrannosaur had wings. Without them, he simply couldn't run or maneuver. Now, one of the main questions is, how did he attack? Yes, friends, despite the fact that he can now run, I still maintain that he simply couldn't bite just like that. Why? Yes, just try to bite something. Running past at a speed of 70 km per hour, your teeth, jaw, and maybe even your life would end immediately. To attack, you need not only to catch up, but also to match speeds. It's better to bypass the prey, and even better to flank it, because if you hesitate for a second, the prey will either turn around, put up its horns, or even become the hunter. What options do we have? Honestly, not many. The comparison with the ostrich is no longer appropriate here. It has a beak to peck at the opponent, and we only have teeth. Of course, you can bite, but the risk of being left without teeth is very high. And our body is maximally lightened for running, so there is only one option left to jump, preferably upwards, to hit the opponent with mass and at least disorient him for a second, to have the opportunity to bite. Well, in a jump, after all, wings can really help to maintain orientation. Now let's put together everything we've learned. What have we ended up with? Dragon, the most common. Dragon. We've created a beautiful, logical picture where everything fits together. Except for one. Such a creature in the modern world would still not have survived, even with all the allowances. Still, the weight and size are prohibitive, and the wings are too small for flight, to put it mildly. Speaking mildly, except if there's one condition, the atmosphere's density. Have you ever tried sticking your hand out of a moving car? Even at 40 kilometers per hour, the air thickens and you can really feel the pressure on your palm. If you're driving at 100 kilometers per hour or more, The density of the flow becomes such that it's hard to keep your hand out. This is exactly how airplanes take off. They accelerate to a certain speed, and when the airflow reaches a certain density, the airplane takes off. For different airplanes, this speed varies. For example, for heavy passenger planes, it's around 230 kilometers per hour. Lighter planes, on the other hand, can take off at speeds of 148 kilometers per hour. Some can even take off at 80. But that's in our atmosphere. If the atmosphere is denser, for example, if it's water, look at the wheels, the depths of submarines. They are quite small compared to the huge boat, and the speed is much less. However, even such small wings allow boats to sharply submerge or rise. In other words, the denser the atmosphere, the less wing surface is needed. And then, when the density is several times higher than today, the dragon form becomes the most convenient for the predator. Of course, in the full sense of the word, he hardly flew, but nothing prevented him from accelerating to 70-80 kilometers per hour, jump and hover at a small height for a long time. Nature has only cultivated this form for 20-40 million years and had no intention of giving it up. So it turns out that either these creatures could not exist at all, or they existed in the form that I described, but the atmosphere was much denser. There are no other options, but if you think these are all arguments, you are mistaken. There is one more argument. It is in plain sight and just screams about itself. But about this in the next episode. Well, the first 5 people who guess what this nuance is will be featured in the title of the next video. To be continued. Friends, none of us are afraid of mistakes. And if you see a mistake in my logic, then, without hesitation, clearly, grammatically, and without typos, leave your angry comment under the video.